You have seen 1,000 horses in your life. On screens, in fields, on cereal boxes and birthday cards. You know exactly what a horse is before you are old enough to speak the word. But the real answer to what a horse actually meant is far stranger. Somewhere on the grasslands of Ice Age Europe, one of your ancestors looked up. A shape moved on the horizon, fast, low, alive. And nothing in their mind had a box to put it in. Try to imagine that moment honestly. No zoos, no paddocks, no pictures, just a creature built like nothing else nearby, running faster than a human could ever hope to run, vanishing before a spear could reach it. What do you do with something like that? You watch. That is the first thing you do. Your ancestor's brain, shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of predator and prey, locked onto the movement instantly. Fast motion at a distance meant one of two things: threat or opportunity. There was no third option in that skull. So the eyes tracked it. The body went still, and every muscle waited for the animal to declare which one it was going to be. It declared neither. It just ran. And that, oddly, may have been the most unsettling part. Think about how unnatural that stillness must have felt. Most encounters your ancestors had with fast-moving animals ended quickly, one way or another. A predator attacked, or it moved on. A prey animal was caught, or it escaped into the trees. But an open plain offers no trees to escape into, and a horse offers no attack to react to. It simply exists at a speed that refuses to be resolved. It runs and disappears, leaving the watcher with nothing but the memory of motion and a question with no answer. Modern researchers who study cave art have tried to reconstruct what that first encounter might have felt like, and the evidence they point to is not spoken language. It is drawn on stone. Archaeologist Jean Clot, who spent decades studying the painted caves of southern France, documented an extraordinary detail. Horses are the single most depicted animal in Ice Age cave art. Not deer, not bison, horses, painted over and over in cave after cave across tens of thousands of years, long before anyone rode one or led one by a rope. Why would that be? Why would a creature nobody had tamed yet, a creature that offered no obvious use beyond meat on the rare occasion it could be caught, dominate the imagination of people who had no reason to worship it? Here is the strange answer. Fear and fascination often live in the same room of the brain. Your ancestors were not looking at a horse and thinking transportation. They had no concept of riding, no concept of pulling a cart. To them, a horse was simply the fastest thing they had ever seen move across open ground, and speed like that meant survival information. Could it kill you? No. Could it feed you? Maybe if you were lucky and patient and willing to work in a group for days. Could it outrun you forever, remaining just barely out of reach, a puzzle that refused to be solved? Yes, every single time. That kind of animal does something specific to a mind built for pattern recognition. It becomes a mystery worth returning to, worth drawing on a cave wall by torchlight, worth teaching your children to notice, worth building a kind of respect around, even worship. Think about the last time something confused you, but you could not stop watching it anyway. A magician's trick. A strange light in the sky. Your brain was not built to shrug at the unexplained. It was built to stare at it until it either made sense or proved dangerous. The horse, for tens of thousands of years, made neither. Consider what daily life looked like for the people painting those images. They lived in small mobile groups, moving with the seasons, following herds of reindeer and bison across cold, open landscapes. Every animal in their world had a role. Some were food, some were danger, some were both, depending on the day. The horse resisted that sorting. It rarely attacked. It rarely allowed itself to be caught. It simply moved through their world like a rumor, glimpsed at a distance, gone before it could be understood, and somehow that made it more important to them, not less. There is a pattern in how humans respond to things that resist explanation. You still see it today. The ocean does not attack most swimmers, and yet its vastness pulls at something ancient in the chest. A thunderstorm rarely strikes the person watching it from a window, and yet the sound alone raises the pulse. Unpredictability, at a safe distance, does not always register as danger. Sometimes it registers as significance. Your ancestors were doing exactly that when they picked up a piece of charcoal and traced the outline of a horse's mane onto stone by firelight. Then something changed. Not overnight, not in one lifetime, but eventually, somewhere on the steppes of what is now Kazakhstan, Humans stopped only watching the horse from a distance. Archaeologist Alan Outram led research into one of the oldest known sites of horse domestication, the Botai culture, dated to roughly 5,500 years ago. His team found something remarkable buried in ancient pottery. Traces of mare's milk, not just bones from hunted horses, but chemical evidence that people were milking them. Which means by that point, horses were not being chased down and killed on sight. They were being kept close, watched daily, managed. That is a staggering shift in relationship. Imagine spending your entire ancestral memory treating an animal as an untouchable blur on the horizon, and then, generation by generation, learning to stand beside it, to touch its flank without it bolting, to lead it by a rope woven from plant fiber. What used to trigger the oldest alarm system in your brain, the one built for fleeing predators and racing threats, was slowly rewired into something closer to partnership. It did not happen because the horse changed. It happened because the relationship changed, one small uneventful moment at a time. A foal raised near a camp instead of hunted. A mare that tolerated a hand on its neck because it had never learned to fear that hand. A human willing to sit quietly nearby day after day, letting patience do what force never could. None of those moments would have made a dramatic scene in a story, but stacked across generations, they rewired an entire species' relationship to another. Anthropologist David Anthony, who has spent much of his career reconstructing the deep history of horse domestication and its role in shaping ancient migrations, has argued that this moment did more than change diets. It changed how far a human group could travel in a single day, how quickly ideas and goods could move between distant communities, and eventually how wars were fought and empires were built. A creature once painted on cave walls out of ore became, over thousands of years, the engine of early globalization. Pause on that for a second. The same animal that once represented pure unpredictability to a frightened Ice Age hunter became, millennia later, the fastest form of communication on Earth. Nothing about the horse changed in that time. What changed was your ancestors. Once horses could be ridden, distance itself changed meaning. A journey that once took a walking group 10 days could take a rider on horseback 2 or 3. Trade routes stretched further than they ever had. Languages spread faster. Entire cultures came into contact with neighbors that would once have been separated by weeks of travel. Historians studying the spread of language, families across Eurasia, have pointed to horseback, riding as one of the most likely accelerants behind how quickly certain languages and technologies moved across vast distances in the ancient world. Picture 2, neighboring communities, separated by a stretch of grassland that once took the better part of 2 weeks to cross on foot. Trade between them would have been rare, difficult, reserved for only the most valuable goods worth the walk. Marriages between distant groups would have been uncommon. News of a conflict, a drought, a discovery might arrive weeks after it mattered. Now picture that same stretch of land crossed in a matter of days by someone on horseback. Suddenly marriage alliances become possible between groups that once barely knew of each other's existence. Goods that would have spoiled or worn out on a long walk arrive intact. Warnings arrive in time to matter. The horse did not just move bodies faster. It moved entire societies closer together, compressing a world that had once felt impossibly vast. That compression did not stop at trade and marriage. It reshaped warfare entirely. A group defending fixed territory on foot now faced raiders who could strike and vanish before a response was possible. Entire military strategies, entire empires rose and fell based on which side had mastered the horse first. The same animal that once triggered nothing but a frozen stare across an open plain became, within a few thousand years, the deciding factor in which civilizations expanded and which one shrank. So what did that first human actually feel, standing on the grassland, watching a wild horse thunder past for the first time in their life? Almost certainly not indifference. Indifference is a luxury of familiarity, and familiarity had not been earned yet. They likely felt something closer to what you feel watching lightning split the sky, or standing at the edge of a cliff you did not expect to find. A jolt through the chest. A pull to keep watching even though your body wants to step back. Or, in its oldest and most literal sense, terror and wonder occupying the exact same breath. Psychologists studying the modern experience of awe describe it in strikingly similar terms. Researcher Keltner, who has spent years studying the emotion of awe and its effects on the human mind, has found that encounters with something vast and hard to explain tend to shrink a person's sense of self and expand their sense of connection to the world around them. Your brain, faced with something it cannot immediately categorize, briefly stops asking, "What does this mean for me?" and starts asking, "What is this?" full stop. That is likely close to what your ancestor experienced. Not a calculation, not a plan, just a moment of pure wordless attention, the same feeling that still hijacks you today when something enormous and unexplainable crosses your path. Here is where it gets stranger still. That same wiring never left you. You do not live near wild horse herds. You do not need to track fast-moving animals across open plains to survive the week. And yet the mechanism that made your ancestor freeze and stare is still fully installed in your skull, waiting for triggers it was never designed for. Ever notice how a sudden flash of movement in your peripheral vision grabs your attention before you consciously decide to look? A notification sliding across your screen, a car changing lanes too fast beside you, a bird bursting out of a bush as you walk past. Your body reacts before your mind catches up, the exact same reflex that once locked onto a horse crossing the horizon, still firing every single day of your modern life. You were built to notice the fast, the unexplained, the thing that might be a threat or might be a gift. That circuitry did not get deleted when horses stopped roaming wild near human settlements. It just found new things to lock onto. Think about how much of your attention today is captured, quite literally by design. Every red notification dot, every autoplay video that begins before you asked for it, every headline written to promise something unresolved. None of that exists by accident. It exists because the engineers and designers building those systems understand, whether explicitly or intuitively, that the human brain cannot look away from fast, unexplained motion, or from anything that promises a resolution it has not yet delivered. You are not weak for noticing those things. You're ancient. Even your fascination with speed itself traces back to that same grassland moment. Watch a room full of people react the instant a race car roars past on a screen, or the way a crowd leans forward when a sprinter bursts off the starting line. Nobody has to teach a child to feel a small thrill at something moving impossibly fast. That reaction arrives pre-installed, inherited from a long line of ancestors for whom fast movement across open ground was never just entertainment. It was information that might decide whether they ate that week, or whether they simply stood in awe of something they could never catch. Even the animals you now call pets carry a faint echo of that same story. A dog that tilts its head at an unfamiliar sound, a cat that freezes mid-stride at a shadow crossing the yard. That same ancient circuitry, threat or opportunity, exists across countless species, including the one now sitting quietly beside you as you read or listen to this. You were never the only creature built this way. You were simply the one who eventually learned to draw the feeling on a wall and later to write it down. And maybe that is the real thread connecting you to that person standing on the grassland thousands of years ago. Not the horse itself. The reaction, the same nervous system, the same flood of attention, the same inability to look away from something fast and strange and not yet understood. Consider what it eventually cost and gave to close that distance between fear and familiarity. Domestication did not happen because early humans stopped being afraid. It happened because generation after generation, small acts of patience slowly outweighed the instinct to flee or fight. Someone had to be the first person willing to stand still a little longer than instinct demanded. Willing to let curiosity win just once over caution. That decision, repeated across countless individuals and countless years, eventually turned the fastest, strangest animal on the horizon into a partner that would carry humans across continents, pull their plows, carry their messages, and in some cultures be buried alongside them as family. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient burial sites where horses were interred beside their riders, decorated with ornaments, treated not as property, but as companions who had earned a place in the next world alongside their humans. That kind of reverence does not appear overnight. It is built from thousands of years of shared history, starting with nothing more than a wary glance across an open plain. None of that would have happened if that very first watcher had simply looked away. Look at how far that awe eventually traveled once it left the cave wall. Centuries after the first tentative partnerships on the steppe, horses began appearing not just in daily life but in myth. Ancient Greek storytellers imagined centaurs, beings that fused human and horse into a single body, as though the two had become so entangled in the imagination that separating them no longer made sense. Norse tradition told of an 8-legged horse capable of carrying its rider between worlds. In cultures spanning from the Eurasian steppe to the Arabian Peninsula, horse deities and horse spirits appeared again and again, worshipped, feared, honored in ceremony. Why would so many unconnected cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, independently decide that this particular animal deserved a place among their gods? Because the awe never fully wore off. Even after horses were tamed, ridden, harnessed to plows and chariots, some residue of that original, wordless astonishment remained. You can domesticate an animal's body. Apparently you cannot fully domesticate the feeling it once produced the very first time your ancestors saw it move. It is worth sitting with how fragile that chain really was. One frightened hunter deciding the risk was not worth it. One group choosing to keep hunting rather than experimenting with raising a foal, and an entirely different history might have unfolded. Instead, across many generations and many separate human groups, enough people chose curiosity over retreat that an entirely new kind of relationship became possible. You are in some very real sense the product of ancestors who kept choosing to look a little longer at the things that startled them. So the next time something fast and unfamiliar crosses your field of vision, and your whole body goes briefly, involuntarily still, know that you are not malfunctioning. You are remembering. Somewhere deep in the oldest part of your brain, a version of you is still standing on an open plain, watching a shape move against the horizon, deciding whether to run, or to stay a little longer and see what happens next. You already know how that story ends. It ends with you right here still watching,